The room was electric with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of sweat, excitement, and the faint aroma of perfume. It was a typical summer night in Las Vegas, but nothing about this night was typical. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Then the music began to build, a deep, pulsing rhythm that seemed to vibrate through every nerve ending. Suddenly, a figure appeared on stage, a silhouette against the bright lights. It was him, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, striding out with a confidence that could only belong to a man who had owned 1,000 stages. Elvis was dressed in a white jumpsuit, pristine and regal, with a high collar that framed his face like a crown. The audience erupted into a deafening cheer, and Elvis grabbed the microphone, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Well, that's all right, Mama, that's all right for you," he snarled, and the band kicked into double time. The room was alive, the energy palpable, and for a moment, it felt like nothing else in the world mattered. But behind the scenes, the story was different. 20 minutes before the show, Elvis was up in his suite, surrounded by his posse. They were holding a sheath of blue telegrams, their faces tense with the weight of the moment. Elvis's hand beat a staccato rhythm on the table as he read through the messages. "This is when it starts getting tense," he muttered to no one in particular. The pressure was mounting, and even the king of rock and roll wasn't immune to it. Elvis's designer, Bill Ballou, had been working tirelessly to create the perfect outfit. He had been inspired by Napoleon's portraits, envisioning a high collar that would draw attention to Elvis's face and emphasize his regal presence. When he showed Elvis the sketches, the king instantly understood. "That's it," Elvis had said, his eyes lighting up. "That's exactly what I want." Bill knew that very few men could pull off such a bold look, but Elvis was different. He was the king, and he carried himself with an imperial grace that made the high collar look like it was made for him. The jumpsuit was crafted from Italian gabardine, with intricate embroidery and real Swarovski crystals imported from Czechoslovakia. It was a work of art, and it was all for Elvis. As the showtime approached, Elvis's nerves were raw. He had always been nervous before performances, no matter how many times he had been on stage. He knew that everything he did was for the audience. "I work absolutely to the audience," he had once told a filmmaker. "Whether it's 6 or 6,000, they bring it out of me, the inspiration, the ham." Elvis strode backstage, surrounded by his crew. The Mafia, the backup singers, Jerry, Red, and Joe, all of them were there. But in that moment, Elvis was utterly alone. He was a gladiator, a warrior about to face the crowd, and he had to be perfect. He slipped into the bathroom, tried on the jumpsuit, and emerged with a confident nod. "Great," he said, and that was it. The show began, and Elvis was transformed. He was no longer just a man in a white jumpsuit. He was a legend. He roared into Ray Charles's blues number, "I Got a Woman," and the crowd erupted. He moved with a grace that was both powerful and sensual, his left leg ticking nervously while the rest of him was still. The women in the audience were dressed to the nines, their hair styled to perfection, and they were all waiting for Elvis to call their name. During Love Me Tender, Elvis took the moment to connect with the audience, kissing the women in the front row with a tenderness that was both intimate and public. He sang with a passion that was raw and unfiltered, and the room was in pandemonium. He was a better actor on stage than he had ever been in his movies, and he was giving everything he had to the crowd. Elvis's posse watched from the wings, their faces a mix of pride and concern. They knew the strain of the road, the pressure of the performances, and the constant demands of fame. But none of that mattered when Elvis was on stage. He was the king, and he was unstoppable. As the show went on, Elvis decided to take it to the next level. He walked into the audience, Sonny West and Richard Davis right behind him, and kissed any girl he came across. "This is my granddaughter, she loves you," a woman cried, and Elvis smiled, bestowing his blessing. The women looked like stewardesses, their faces lit up with excitement, and they all wanted a piece of the king. "Elvis, kiss me, kiss me," the cries echoed through the room. Elvis moved through the crowd like a force of nature, his presence magnetic and undeniable. He leaned back and gave one last kiss to a lucky girl before gliding back onto the stage, holding a necklace someone had given him. "Sorry I couldn't make it up there." He motioned to the sky deck, and the room roared its approval. Elvis had brought Sin City to its knees, and he was showing everyone why he was Elvis damn Presley. But the pressure of fame was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. As the show continued, the collar on Elvis's jumpsuit began to wilt, a subtle reminder of the toll the performances were taking on him. He looked like he had been through the wars, but he kept giving the audience everything he had. The band played on, and Elvis sang with a passion that was both heart-wrenching and awe-inspiring. In the dressing room, Elvis's nerves were still frayed. He demanded to know why Joe Esposito had brought him down so early, his voice tinged with frustration. The tension was palpable, and the other guys waited in the periphery, looking helpless. For all their TCB bravado, there was nothing they could do for him. Elvis was the one who had to walk out there alone and perform, and the weight of it was heavy on his shoulders. But when the lights came up and the music began, all of that melted away. Elvis was in his element, and he was unstoppable. He was the king, and he was giving the audience a show they would never forget. On the road, anything goes. The wives and girlfriends usually stay back home in Memphis, except for the occasional Vegas opening night. One night in the 70s, a fan threw red, frilly panties on stage. Elvis picked them up and with his smooth charm said, "Are these yours, honey?" Elvis concerts were more than just shows, they were events, like a religious experience. He could do anything and the crowd would love it. Once he lay on his back and sang to the ceiling, and the audience went wild. It didn't matter what he did. They were with him for that one magical night. At the end of the show, Elvis would lift his cape and do a victory walk across the stage, stopping at each corner to wave to the roaring crowd. He wore a white suit with a red-lined cape. He moved like a prize fighter, pacing the stage as if it were his land. He ended every concert with "Can't Help Falling in Love." The audience screamed with joy and sorrow, knowing he would soon be gone. Elvis rolled his eyes, sharing a joke with his band. He knew exactly what he was doing. Ever since 1955, when he sang in those gritty roadhouses, there was another Elvis on stage, the one who made everyone lose their minds. When the show was over, he went down the steps, and his friends Espo, Schiller, and Red surrounded him. Fans screamed, "Elvis, Elvis," as he was thrown into the back of a limo and driven away. Backstage, the first thing Elvis asked was about the sound. "Very good, very, very good," his manager, Esposito, assured him, speaking with a soft Tennessee drawl. Elvis had a beauty that was almost indestructible. His voice and presence were powerful. Sometimes he looked pale and tired. Other times he was full of energy. In 1972, Elvis was a changeling, changing his look from day to day. During a practice session, Elvis wore a blue-designed coat, a mix of Carnaby Street and Southern charm. He moved with the grace of a prince. Another night, everyone was dressed up. Women wore miniskirts and go-go boots, and the men had Cuban heels and bell-bottoms. It was like a nightclub, and the entire audience smoked through the show. Elvis sang "Bridge Over Troubled Water" with a richer, deeper voice. He was fully immersed in the music, leaving his heart on the stage. His jumpsuits, often mocked, were actually brilliant stage costumes. In the 70s, fashion was questionable, but Elvis always looked the best. He had the style of a Southern gentleman, with the sweet inspirations and Jerry Schilling adding to the vibe. Elvis fans were polite and respectful. They worked hard, paid their taxes, and loved Elvis like family. When he asked to turn up the lights, they stayed in their seats, looking at him with admiration. They were there for him, not just the celebrity. Out on the road, Elvis felt free. He could go anywhere and feel the love. He kissed fans and read the cards from the flowers sent to him. He was at peace with the music, away from the pressures of Graceland. In the 70s, Elvis was heavier spiritually. He was darker but funnier, understanding life's complexities. He had lived through so much, and his energy was deeper. He gave everything to his music and his fans. At the end of a show, as he sang "Can't Help Falling in Love," the audience cried and cheered. Elvis spread his arms, offering himself to them. A woman in the crowd, dressed like a librarian, banged on the stage, shouting for Elvis, but he was already gone, surrounded by his friends and off to the next city. Elvis loved touring. It was where he felt most alive, meeting people and sharing moments. After a week at Graceland, he would get restless and want to go out again. He brought people together, creating memories they would never forget. Backstage, Elvis was a good guy. He joked with his friends, like when he pulled back his hand from a handshake with Jerry Schilling, and they laughed. When the days were good, they had so much fun together. Elvis had big closets and a swimming pool because he could. Born into poverty, once he made money, he shopped like a king. He was loyal to Lansky's, the store where he started, and always called the owner Mr. Lansky. His closet was filled with custom-made jumpsuits, shiny boots, and unique designs. Each piece told a story of the man who made everything possible. Elvis Presley was a man of many things: fame, fortune, and an endless supply of fascinating items. But it wasn't just the stuff he had that made him unique. It was the life he lived and the people he touched. One of the most intriguing aspects of Elvis's life was his unexpected visit to the White House in 1970, a trip that seemed to encapsulate both his spontaneity and his deep desire to make a difference. Elvis had been working non-stop since he was 20, and when he finally had some downtime, he acted like a kid with a massive allowance. He loved to play with fireworks, shoot guns in the backyard, and even bulldoze and burn down old buildings at Graceland. But one day, after a big fight with his dad, Vernon, and his wife, Priscilla, about his spending habits, Elvis decided to take a road trip. Not just any road trip, but a trip to Washington, D.C., to meet President Richard Nixon. Elvis called his friends Jerry Schilling and Sonny West, and together they flew to D.C. on the plane. Elvis wrote a letter to Nixon, expressing his desire to help combat drug culture and other issues. He dropped the letter off at the White House early in the morning, and then headed to the FBI headquarters. But things took a surprising turn when the White House called back, inviting Elvis to meet with President Nixon. Elvis was thrilled. He dressed in one of his signature outfits, a white, high-collared shirt with a lion's head pendant, and a black tunic with a paisley silk-lined Edwardian jacket. He accessorized with his massive gold belt and sunglasses, making sure he looked every bit the king of rock and roll. When Elvis and his friends arrived at the Oval Office, Nixon was there to greet them. The two men couldn't have been more different. Nixon was known for his cautious, almost paranoid nature, while Elvis was a man of passion and spontaneity. Despite their differences, they found common ground in their love for their country. Elvis explained his desire to help fight drug use and other social issues. He even offered to go undercover if he could get a special badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD. Nixon, intrigued by Elvis's enthusiasm, agreed to help him get the badge. The meeting was a mix of awkwardness and charm. Nixon, who wasn't known for his social skills, tried his best to connect with Elvis. Elvis, on the other hand, was his usual charismatic self, showing Nixon his cufflinks and various police badges. At one point, Elvis even hugged Nixon, a gesture that caught everyone off guard. Nixon, not a hugging kind of guy, patted Elvis on the shoulder, a bit unsure of what to do. After the meeting, Elvis brought his friends Jerry and Sonny into the Oval Office. Nixon, trying to be a good host, gave them tie clasps and cufflinks with the presidential seal. Elvis, always the thoughtful friend, reminded Nixon to find something for their wives too. Together, they rummaged through Nixon's desk, looking for the perfect gifts. This impromptu visit to the White House was a moment that captured the essence of Elvis. He was a man who could be spontaneous, generous, and deeply passionate about the things he believed in. It was a moment that showed how even the most powerful men in the world could be touched by the spirit of a rock and roll legend. Elvis's life was a series of such moments that defined him as more than just a celebrity, but as a man who lived life to the fullest. Whether it was through his music, his style, or his unexpected visits to the White House, Elvis Presley left an indelible mark on the world. Elvis was all about getting things done, and he had a special way of doing it. He took the phrase TCB, which stood for taking care of business, and made it his own. He added in a flash to it because that's how he liked things to be. This was a big moment for Elvis, and it happened in October 1971. He and Priscilla were in their home in Los Angeles, and they had a drawing of the TCB logo. Elvis loved it and asked his friend Jerry to get the logo made into necklaces. There were 7 necklaces in total, 1 for Elvis and 6 for his closest friends. It was a big deal to have one. The TCB logo became a part of Elvis' life. It was on his ring, his plane, and even on the napkins at Graceland. Elvis had a lot of style, and he wanted to make sure everything he owned looked just right. He even had a special pair of sunglasses with TCB on them. These glasses were made by a man named Hans Fiebig, who owned a store in Los Angeles. Elvis knew exactly what he wanted, and Hans was the right person to make it happen. The glasses were made of 14-karat gold, and Elvis had them in silver and gold. His favorite lenses were brown and gray gradient. Elvis was very polite, but he didn't have much patience. When he wanted something, he wanted it right away. Hans said that Elvis was the best payer in the business. He always made sure his bills were paid on time. In 1971, Elvis and Priscilla were dealing with some personal issues. During Christmas, Elvis gave his friends McDonald's gift certificates as a joke before giving them their real gift. After the holidays, Elvis told everyone that Priscilla was leaving him. He was very upset, but he kept it together for his fans. Despite his personal problems, Elvis was still a huge star. He was excited about performing in New York City. On June 9, 1972, he held a press conference before his show. The press was very excited to see him, and there was a lot of commotion. The Colonel, Elvis' manager, handed out pens and calendars with Elvis' name on them. When Elvis finally appeared, everyone was in awe. He looked amazing, but he admitted that it was hard to live up to his image. Elvis performed in New York City, and the show was a huge success. Even famous musicians like George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and John Lennon were there. David Bowie, who was just starting his career, flew from London to see the show. Jerry Leiber, who wrote many of Elvis' hit songs, was also there. He was impressed by Elvis' performance and was surprised that Elvis noticed him leaving early. After the New York show, Elvis continued to tour. He loved performing and felt alive when he was on stage. In 1970, he did 137 shows, and the number increased over the next few years. He did 168 shows in 1973, which was the most he ever did in one year. The stress of touring was very hard on him, but he loved it. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship continued to struggle. They separated on February 23, 1972, and divorced on October 9, 1973. After the divorce, Elvis had some health issues, and his weight became a problem. His friends, like Bernard Lansky, noticed the changes. Elvis was very upset about the divorce and had a hard time accepting it. He told his friends that he had meditated, hoping Priscilla would stay, but it didn't work. Deep down, he knew he wanted his freedom. In January 1973, Elvis performed in a worldwide satellite concert from Hawaii. Bill Ballou, who made many of Elvis' suits, was unsure about a corduroy suit he made for the concert. But when Elvis got off the plane in Hawaii, he was wearing the suit and looked great. This was just another example of Elvis' amazing style and his ability to make anything look good. Elvis and his wardrobe designer, Bill Ballou, rarely talked about clothes. But there were a few times when Elvis had specific requests. Once, he asked Bill to make him a suit with a panther on it. Another time, he wanted a peacock suit to match the stained glass window he was having installed at Graceland. The most memorable request came when Elvis and Bill were in Hawaii. Elvis wanted a white jumpsuit and a cape with a huge American eagle on it. Bill remembered seeing a giant American eagle on top of the American embassy in London. He thought it would be perfect for Elvis. Elvis loved the idea and said, "It's got to say America, that's fabulous." Bill designed the jumpsuit and cape, and Elvis loved it, but there was a funny twist. When Elvis wore the cape for the first time, it was so heavy that he fell over and couldn't get back up. He found it hilarious and laughed until he couldn't breathe. Things got even more hectic when Elvis threw the cape into the audience one night and gave away his jewel-encrusted belt another night. Joe Esposito, Elvis' friend, called Bill in a panic, asking if he could replace both items. Bill was working on Flip Wilson's TV show and couldn't leave, but he and his team made new items overnight. Bill's assistant, Nikki, flew to Hawaii with the replacements. During the flight, a stewardess asked if the cape was Elvis and was thrilled when Nikki said yes. She kept telling everyone, "I touched Elvis' cape." The concert in Hawaii was a huge success. It was broadcast to countries in the Far East, and later to Europe. In the United States, 57% of the TV audience watched the show, Elvis watched it from his home in Los Angeles. In 1972, Elvis met Linda Thompson, a young and beautiful woman who became his girlfriend. They started dating right away. Linda was considered one of Elvis' best girlfriends, a lifer rather than a queen for a day. In 1974, Elvis and Linda began renovating Graceland. One of the most famous rooms they created was the Jungle Room. It had a Polynesian theme with green shag carpeting on the floor and ceiling, carved wood, and monkey ashtrays. The room was so unique that it became a tourist attraction. Elvis also redesigned the pool room with bright cotton fabric and a Tiffany-like light fixture over the pool table. The TV room got a modern makeover with yellow and navy blue accents, 3 TV sets, a mirrored ceiling, and a Tesabe Lightning flash mural. Elvis even moved into a Howard Johnson's motel while the renovations were being done. Elvis loved his daughter, Lisa Marie, and would do anything for her. One day he called David Cassidy, the teen heartthrob, and asked if Lisa Marie could visit him on the set of The Partridge Family. David didn't believe it was really Elvis at first, but he soon found out it was. A limo arrived, and Elvis introduced David to Priscilla and Lisa Marie. In 1974, Bruce Springsteen was in Nashville and decided to visit Graceland. He and his bandmates got a taxi and went to the house. Seeing a light on upstairs, they thought Elvis was home. Bruce ran up the driveway, but guards stopped him and told him Elvis wasn't there. Bruce tried to convince them he was a real rock star, but they didn't believe him and put him back on the street. In March 1973, Colonel Parker sold Elvis' back catalog to RCA Records for $5,400,000. This was a bad business move because Elvis and the Colonel lost control over the material and future royalties. It showed the financial pressures Elvis and Parker were under. In the last years of Elvis' life, he had his good and bad days, but he always had a great sense of humor. One day, he visited a hospital in Memphis to see Louise Thompson, Linda's sister-in-law, who had just given birth. He was recognized, even though he was wearing a surgical mask. In April 1975, Barbara Strace and her boyfriend John Peters visited Elvis in his dressing room to pitch him a movie idea. They wanted to remake A Star is Born, and Elvis was excited. They went into his walk-in closet to talk privately. Barbara made the pitch, and Elvis said he wanted to do it. But the Colonel, who didn't want Elvis to bypass him, made demands that killed the deal. The Colonel asked for $1 million in salary, $100,000 in expenses, and 50% of the profits. The offer was too high, and the movie never happened. Elvis could have made a great movie, but the Colonel's greed made sure it never did. Jerry Schilling, one of Elvis's closest friends, had a complicated relationship with Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager. Jerry admits that he had a love-hate relationship with the Colonel. Despite growing very close to the Colonel in the last 20 years of his life, and even speaking at his funeral, Jerry acknowledges that the Colonel was a good person but didn't fully understand rock and roll. The Colonel came from an era of traditional music, like Bing Crosby, and while he did a lot for Elvis, he also had a tendency to keep Elvis within strict boundaries. In 1974 alone, Elvis's concert tours earned him around $4 million, which he split 2/3 to the Colonel's 1/3. His performances in Las Vegas and Tahoe brought in another $700,000, also split the same way, and he earned $750,000 from RCA, which was split 50-50. Despite this success, Elvis's personal expenses were sky high. He spent a lot on airplanes, cars, racquetball courts, and jewelry, not to mention the large payroll for his family and friends. His medical bills and the upkeep of his houses, especially Graceland, were also significant. In 1975, Elvis had to borrow $350,000 from the National Bank of Commerce in Memphis, using Graceland as collateral. One day, when Lisa Marie was young, she told her father, "I don't want you to die." Elvis reassured her, "Don't worry about me, I'm not going anywhere." But Lisa Marie had a feeling, and it turned out to be true. She could sense that something was wrong, even though she didn't fully understand it at the time. In 1976, Jerry Schilling quit his job with Elvis, telling him that their friendship was more important than the job. Later that year, Elvis's father, Vernon, fired Red West and Sonny West, who had worked for Elvis for 16 years. They were upset, but they later wrote a book about Elvis's life, which many found controversial. By 1976, most of Elvis's original crew had left. Joe Esposito and Larry Geller moved to California with their families. Lamar Fike lived in Nashville, and Jerry Schilling, Red West, and Sonny West were gone. Elvis was now surrounded by new people who did their jobs, but didn't have the same close bond with him. In 1977, a book called Elvis, What Happened was published. It was a harsh account of Elvis's life, and it deeply troubled him, especially about what his daughter and fans would think. Elvis's last years were tough. His friend Joe Esposito said, "He was just a wonderful person, but the last couple of years were tough. It was tough for all of us because we knew that was not the Elvis we knew. It was almost like he was sick, and this other person took over that was not him." In 1976, Elvis's concerts were sometimes interrupted because of his exhaustion. On May 29, 1977, he left the stage during a concert in Baltimore and returned after 30 minutes. On June 26, 1977, he gave his last performance at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. Bernard Lansky, a longtime friend, thought Elvis changed a lot in his final years. He became nervous and uptight, and small things would upset him. Lansky believed that Elvis's mother's death and his divorce from Priscilla affected him greatly. There were two different Elvises, Lansky said. Elvis's weight gain and fear of aging also depressed him. His mother had died at 46, and this may have worried him. Offstage, he often wore stretchy warm-up suits, sunglasses, and tennis hats. Even though he could still sing, and the fans still loved him, it was heartbreaking to see him struggle. On August 16, 1977, at 2:30 in the afternoon, Elvis was found unconscious in his bathroom at Graceland. He was pronounced dead an hour later at Baptist Memorial Hospital. The coroner said Elvis had coronary disease and mild hypertension, and his arteries were like those of an 80-year-old man. He had been hospitalized several times in the past few years for various health issues, including hypertension, an enlarged colon, and liver problem. When news of Elvis's death spread, a crowd gathered outside the hospital, hoping it was a mistake. People were devastated, and the death of Elvis felt like a significant loss to many. Priscilla, who was on her way to Memphis, was heartbroken. She said Elvis had taught her everything, and had become like a father and a god to her. In the moment of his death, she realized she had grown up. Elvis was buried in Graceland, wearing a white suit, light blue shirt, and white tie that his father had chosen. His death left a lasting impact on those who knew him and on his fans. Years later, people like Bruce Springsteen reflected on what Elvis meant to them. Elvis had somehow whispered a dream in everyone's ear, and they all dreamed it together. Elvis Presley, the first modern superstar, is more popular today, 27 years after his death, than he was when he was alive. Joe Esposito, Elvis's former bodyguard and friend, thinks Elvis would be surprised by his enduring fame. "Oh, I'm sure he is. If he's up in heaven," he's saying, "boy, look at all those crazy people out there still listening to me, still writing books about me," Joe says with a laugh. Elvis's fans are passionate, sometimes in ways that can be both touching and a bit unsettling. Some impersonators try to mimic his every move, while others firmly believe that Elvis is still alive and walking among us. But what draws people to Elvis? His talent, of course, but it's his humanity that makes him relatable. He was generous and kind, but also rambunctious and lonely. His struggles and triumphs mirror those of many people, which is why he remains so beloved. Larry Geller, one of Elvis's closest friends, remembers a time when he was on an airplane. A man approached him wearing a TCB necklace and with his hair styled like Elvis's. Larry asked, "Wow, where'd you get that?" The man confidently replied, "Elvis gave it to me." When Larry asked if he knew Elvis, the man said, "Sure did, I was his drummer and bodyguard for 7 years." Larry couldn't pop the man's bubble, so he just laughed and let it go. It was clear that for this man, and for many others, Elvis was more than just a musician. He was a symbol of something deeply personal. Elvis's friends remember him fondly. Joe Esposito recalls how Elvis would sit alone in Graceland and sing for hours. "That's what made him happy," Joe says. "He just knew that people loved him when he sang, And that's why today, when young kids hear his music, they don't know who he is, they just like it. When Elvis sings, you just feel better. Bill Ballou, another close friend, remembers Elvis's generosity. Elvis gave him a 450 SL Mercedes convertible with the license plate 2BB. One time in Los Angeles, Ernest Borgnine pulled up next to him and asked, "What does your license mean? It's been driving my wife and me crazy." Bill replied, "To Bill Ballou from Elvis Presley." It's these small acts of kindness that made Elvis so special to those who knew him. Jerry Schilling, another longtime friend, wishes he could stay up all night talking to Elvis with no agenda. "You never know, we might laugh all night or we might cry all night," he says. The bond they shared was deep and genuine. Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, was just 9 years old when he died. She kept her watch set 2 hours ahead to Memphis time for years, a small but significant way to stay connected to her father. For her, Elvis was more than just a legend. He was a complex person with both light and darkness, talent and humility, greatness and flaws. Elvis lived a full life, and even in death, he continues to live on through his music and the memories of those who knew him. His legacy is not just about his charisma or his talent, but about his humanity. And in the end, how we view Elvis, whether we see him as fun-loving, decadent, lonely, willful, loving, or tragic, says more about us than it does about him. After all, he was just living his life, and it's up to us to find meaning in his story. Elvis Presley's life was a series of bright moments, captured in photos that tell stories of his journey from a young dreamer to the king of rock and roll. In 1962, at the Seattle World's Fair, Elvis was on the set of It Happened at the World's Fair, surrounded by his friends and Colonel Parker, looking every bit the movie star. A year later, he was in Las Vegas, having fun with his friends on the set of Viva Las Vegas, a movie that would become a classic. In 1958, Elvis was in Los Angeles, recording the soundtrack for King Creole. The room was filled with the sounds of his band, including the legendary Scotty, Bill, and DJ, along with additional musicians to create a unique Dixieland rock sound. This album would showcase Elvis's evolving style and musical depth. By 1965, Elvis was back in Hawaii for Paradise Hawaiian Style, relaxing on the beautiful Henoma Bay. That same year, in his dressing room during the filming of Harum Skarum, Elvis was surrounded by fans, signing autographs and sharing a moment of genuine connection. His outfit for the movie reflected his growing interest in more elaborate and theatrical styles. In 1967, Elvis's life took a personal turn when he married Priscilla in Las Vegas. The wedding, simple yet significant, was a moment of pure happiness for the couple. Later that year, on the set of Stay Away Joe in Arizona, Elvis continued to charm audiences with his presence and talent. 1968 was a pivotal year for Elvis. He donned his famous black leather outfit for the NBC special, a performance that would become one of the most iconic images of his career. The show, taped in Burbank, California, was a comeback that reignited his fame and reminded the world why he was the king. Later that year, he appeared in a gold jacket for another NBC special, further cementing his status as a cultural icon. By 1970, Elvis was a fixture in Las Vegas, performing regularly with his band at the MGM Studios. The core of his band, including Ronnie Tutt, Charlie Hodge, Glenn D. Hardin, Jerry Sheff, John Wilkinson, and James Burton, became a tight-knit group that supported Elvis's musical journey. Photos from this time show Elvis on stage, interacting with fans, and performing with passion and energy. In the early 1970s, Elvis's style became even more extravagant, epitomized by his famous peacock jumpsuit. He continued to tour and perform, connecting with fans across the country. One of the most memorable moments was in 1973, when he performed Aloha from Hawaii via satellite, a concert that reached millions of viewers around the world. Elvis's life wasn't just about music and movies. He was also a father, and photos show him with his daughter, Lisa Marie, sharing tender moments. In 1970, he received the JC Award for the nation's 10 Most Outstanding Men of the Year, giving a rare acceptance speech that revealed his humble beginnings and the realization of his dreams. Elvis's influence extended beyond entertainment. In 1970, he met with President Nixon in the Oval Office, a meeting that highlighted his status as a cultural figure. His philanthropy, particularly through the Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation, continues to support causes he cared about, such as Presley Place in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley's legacy is a testament to his talent, charisma, and the impact he had on the world. His life, captured in these photos, is a story of dreams, hard work, and the power of music to bring people together. Even today, his spirit lives on through his music and the memories he left behind. If you want to continue his legacy, consider supporting the Elvis Presley Charitable Foundation, where you can help make a difference in the lives of others, just as Elvis did.